Tonight, our subject will deal with man's search for personal happiness. In all of our travels all over the earth, we have taken note of how people feel in their heart that they find happiness in the evidences of the senses and the acquisition of those senses. But we live such a short time in reality. Our lifespan today, although much longer than the Etruscans or the ancient Romans, at the same time is through medical science prolonged a great deal. We live such a small drop of eternity, and we come on the scene, and in the first year of our life we acquire so many uses of our senses. We are able to see, to hear, to feel, to taste, and to touch. And all of the senses bring us into touch with the world that we find all around us. And whether or not a world snarl actually exists, we are unaware of it as children. And so as children, we grow up according to the environmental patterns all around us, possessed with the hereditary factors not only of our parents but of ourselves, and the influx of the influences of millions of people upon our life stream. And in this environment, it is very easy to see that we can develop what is actually almost a sterile condition, where all of our thoughts are molded by our environment and by this impact aforementioned. And so, who are we really? What are we really? We are products of this environment, and our search for happiness is geared to the transient conditions of the world. For example, in former days, it was usually the prerogative of most people, according to the normal pattern here in America, to wait until they were probably 15 or 16 before they knew many of the facts of life, which are themselves not all that important. They are natural manifestations, but these facts were concealed from children in the dark at the top of the stairs. And so nothing was really told to them until the proper time, if they had good parents, and parents wouldn't dream of giving them an education along these lines in the kindergarten, as is the forte of the world today. This is what they want to do, many of them. Not all of them, but some of them. And so we have a different permissiveness in our society, which is created today with all of its syntheticness. And we are the products of that environment. And so it's very difficult for us to actually harness the great God power within ourselves, which is there and is very simple and is waiting to manifest, but the whole of society has more or less molded a anthropomorphic God, one made in their own image, and they have an idea that this is the real and living God. And what actually happens is that we synthesize this God made in our own image. And in one way, we actually seek to prove the existence of this God by our life, without actually realizing that there is a true and living God, the God that Elijah the prophet implored long ago to set fire to the wood upon the altar, and the fire came down from heaven in full view of them all, and created the great cosmic flame that burned the wood and even licked up the water. Well, these events are phenomenal. I thought so as a child. I'm sure that many of you have thought so. And they do not ordinarily manifest, and therefore we have tended to create a sense of the Bible days as apart from this age, which we do not hold to be truth, believing that the progressive God that we serve and that we love is very concerned with man made in his own image today, even as he was concerned in the Bible days. For the Bible days are in actuality the days that are with us still, the days of nature. And nature herself is her own Bible. And whereas we believe in the sacred writings of the Scriptures, all of them, and many of them some of you have not even heard of, including the books of the Bible that were even taken out of the Bible by the church in olden times. At the same time, we do not regard these as the fulfillment of all the life requirements we have in order to meet the demands of our happiness, our search for happiness. But what is this search for happiness? We have made it a thing entirely related to the sense consciousness, that which pleases the palate or the eye, which pleases the ear, which pleases our desires. This becomes the fruit of our life. And this is so common a fruit that truly we have nothing to distinguish ourselves from one another, nothing creative whatsoever to actually bring forth and bear on the tree of our life. And this seems to us to be almost a barrenness, a condition where nothing is actually realized, because we must think of the destiny of the stars, of the spiral nebulae, of the earth and the ages of the earth. We are products physically of the earth, but we are also products of the heavenly fire. Do you understand? As products of the fusion of the earthy, with the heavenly fire, we ought to accept a greater challenge to our lives than that which most of us have accepted. And I am not certainly preaching at you. I am speaking to you as pertains to the world vision, the vision of mediocrity, which is so prevalent and destructive in our time, that a Yale professor recently said that as a nation and as a world, we were 50,000 years behind in our human relationships, but very much ahead in our technological development. We are able then to hold a vision of bringing 50,000-year-old backward man forward so that he can be current with the technology of this age at least, and even past the technology of this age, and be able to develop spiritually as he was intended to do, which he has not done. Now, one of the things that makes us so different from most of the other organizations in the world is that we believe in progressive revelation. This does not mean that we deny all of the truths that mankind have for so long believed. We put many of them into their proper perspective, and we relate them to the great cosmic truths of eternal life. But we more than anything believe in progressive revelation, which means that God speaks to us still. God is still in communion with our world, and He is developing mankind today, whether we know it or not, so that every year a certain number of people actually ascend from the face of this planet, some of them from Luxor, Egypt, from the temple of Serapis Bay, in the same manner as Jesus Christ ascended 2,000 years ago. And this seems at first a difficult statement for us to accept. But I do not think it is so difficult if we envision all that man has wrought and then consider the capabilities of God Himself. God is a spirit, and He possesses all wisdom and all power and all love. When that love then is harnessed, and it is harnessed in our day, it is able to produce the miracle of transmutation or change in the world of those individuals who recognize their need for change. I suppose if most of us were never told, or if it was never pointed out to us, either by ourselves or someone, that we needed change, we would probably keep on going at the same rate that we're going all the time. In other words, we would live just the same. We would make no changes in our world at all, because why should we? Someone has to show us that we have a need to actually wrought change in our own world. And then we have to be told what that change is, what we can do, what we can think, what we should think. And we are going to find out that even 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years and more do have an effect on our thinking and feeling. And the tenure of our time upon this sterile environment of the world at large, and this is what Jesus meant. He was not cursing the plants or the trees or the flowers or nature. He was actually taking a stand and issue against the manner of life of the people. Do you understand that? It was the manner of life of the people. When he made the statement where he said, do you think that the people upon whom the tower of Siloam fell, and of course it killed them, do you think they were sinners above all the other sinners who dwell in Jerusalem? I tell you, nay. For except you repent, he says, you shall likewise perish. And the repentance of which he spoke meant to turn around or about face or begin a real search for happiness as God ordained it. In other words, to be reoriented, to find a new vision within ourselves, a vision of beauty and the miracle of life. Now, when we look at the world all around us, we are sometimes brutally confused. The trauma of the world is sometimes, in fact, I think often, and becoming more often, very harsh and very violent to behold. And so the outer world becomes less and less appetizing to us, and perhaps we would have a tendency to retreat from the world, which of course is not the desire of the great masters or of God, because if we retreat from the world, we cannot fulfill our destiny here. And it will be necessitated that we return back to the world once again, and that we enter this world as a little baby, come back here and be reborn again, and more or less start life over? Oh no. Start life where you left off, because although you may not remember it, the soul does. And it is the soul knowing that must be considered in having a higher vision of life. So you see, the harshness of the world has a tendency to push us away from the world. And yet it is not in recoil through force, but in recoil through knowledge and the finding of our true self and our true destiny that we can make progress. In other words, I have often said that to take people upon a mountaintop and set them apart from the whole world, you could easily make them saints. We have this example in the case of our India trip. We took 50 pilgrims to India, and they were all except one particularly dedicated to our principles. And this one we thought was dedicated to our principles. We had known this lady for many, many years, but when we arrived in Amsterdam and various other ports of call, we observed that this lady would manage to get herself into a position where she could stand physically between Elizabeth and I as we would speak to the visiting dignitaries such as the former Prime Minister of India. This was, of course, very embarrassing to us because this lady insisted on standing right between ourselves, you see. And then when we would say something to them, she'd say, oh, that isn't true. Oh, that isn't true. And of course, one cannot have the devil's advocate along with them on a tour such as this because it is very embarrassing and it also forestalls any possibility of communicating with people. Now, this is an example that I cite because it shows how the problems of others can, through association, become very difficult for everyone. In other words, this lady was suffering from a terrible inferiority complex, whereby she was using our organization as a means of relieving her inferiority complex without actually understanding God. She was really getting very little out of it. She wasn't decreeing, she wasn't praying, she wasn't hardly reading the material. And so she had very little understanding of it. So it is not tenure that necessarily guarantees the progress of the soul. In other words, I could sit here in the Summit Lighthouse for 50 years and go nowhere. Or I could sit here for 5 days and really go someplace. This is why Jesus said, the last shall be first, and many of the first shall be last. Because he puts the burden of the responsibility back upon us. It is necessary for us as individuals to be able to recognize this fact and do something about it. We are not saints on the mountaintop apart from the world, But we are saints, if we're saints at all, in the world, mingling with people. And we must demonstrate our ability to understand people to some degree. And we must have a love for people and for their various conditions. Speaking from no ivory tower, we must understand that all of us, but for the grace of God, would be exactly as everyone is. And so the power that wrought change is the God within ourselves. And whether you go over to Tibet and you talk to the Dalai Lama as we did, or whether you go to the political capital of the nation at New Delhi and meet with the Prime Minister of India, or you go to Calcutta in India and meet with the former Minister of State, it doesn't make any difference. All of these people, of course, have their own personal struggles. But we know that each of us, through our manifestation of self-mastery, can determine the course of our own life. And I think this is very essential, that each of us, by God's grace, should contact God directly. And through the great masters, we can do that. Someone says, well, why do we need the masters? It's a good question, and one that I think is worthy of the thinking man. Because the reason we need the masters is because they are avant-garde personalities devoted to God and charged by Him with the responsibility of administering His affairs on the planet Earth. There are then a select group or body of masters, and they are in contact with some of their chelas on the planet. Chela meaning, of course, the disciple. And the disciple of the master is here on the planet. They are there, and where is here and where is there? Well, we read where St. Germain says, I am here and I am there, which denotes that in the ascended master consciousness, or in the consciousness of God, that there is no actuality of movement, but only of realization. That if you realize anything in particular at a given moment, you may be a part of it. You do not need to move in space as we are accustomed to do by train, plane, boat, or bus. Because God is everywhere, through becoming a part of God, we are also everywhere in the consciousness state. I think this is probably well illustrated by our own body. If you pick us, we bleed. And it hurts. And wherever this pick goes in the physical body, from our toes to the top of our head, we as individuals are aware of that. And the body of God, in a sense, probably can be said to be a part of Prakriti, which in the Sanskrit tongue is nature. And this nature that we're talking about is in a way the body of God. And the egg, the cosmic egg, that I would like to think of as representing the circuit of the universe, the return of energy. This is all one. And we do not need to think of time lapses when we think of cosmic manifestations, the lapse being always in ourselves. We do not realize fully what God Himself has posited in the universe from the very beginning. And if we do, it is very dynamic and very effulgent. It is very wonderful. It is a miracle of cosmic conception. Once we begin to generate in ourselves the realization that we, putting ourselves in the position of being recipients, are a part of God, and we're a part of God from the very beginning, that we are a part of the divine plan, that we are not some afterthought that's jumbled into the universe inordinately. Then you see, we immediately come to the realization that the law, the dharma of the law requires we should receive, so that we can be alerted and can tune in with this great cosmic energy which is passing through us at all times. For example, right now, every television station in this area is broadcasting. Every radio station that's on the air is broadcasting. We're in the broadcasting time of day. And so pictures and images and sound are going right through this room as they are through our automobile. They're going everywhere. But unless we have the apparatus of receiving them, they may as well not exist at all to us unless we're in the studio or somewhere where a set is manifesting the picture or the sound. And because this is true, we find many people in our world who have no awareness They have no consciousness whatsoever of this truth, for they have never been exposed to it. They have never lived. They can wait to die. Because there is no purpose in their life, whether they live or die at all. Because the purpose of their life becomes purely a sensual matter of life experiences. Everything actually in their mind revolves around themselves. They have not accustomed themselves to think in terms of a universe in which the self is absorbed pleasantly. Oh yes, with spearmint flavor. It goes right back into the Godhead. You see what I mean? And we enjoy this process because it is the will of God. Now, when an amoeba absorbs something, of course, this is simply a natural process. And it is also a natural process when God absorbs man. But he will not do so without consent. For according to the universal plan, God intends to take man back into his heart from the point in space where he first conceived of man. He intends to take man back according to the dictates of man's free will. And therefore the source of all unhappiness is our free will. Because through the misuse of our free will, we generate conditions through karmic law, which always come full circle back to our own doorstep. And likewise, all the virtue and beauty of life is also brought to our doorstep. Therefore, the source of happiness lies in ourselves and simultaneously lies in God. And this is no far-off God out of our reach, but one who is brought not off of the street, but from the highest outposts of heaven, and is more than willing to communicate to us the beauty and perfection of his level. I think the world has a great deal of treasures of art, a great deal of treasures of music, a great deal of treasures of beauty and perfection in a relative sense. For example, our beloved friend Paul the Venetian, when he was embodied upon earth, was known as Paolo Veronese. And he was a great artist who was able to convey beauty. And Titian was a great artist, of course. And then we have many Dutch painters, such as Rembrandt, who painted beautiful works that inspire the soul of man even today. Well, this shows us that the genius in man is greater than man. We have often found that people take their native genius to be the results of their own doing. But what a senseless thing this is in reality. Because here we are, all the way from probably 12 years old, up to God only knows how old some of you are. But I dare say that we have a few people here that are 50 or over, and it doesn't make any difference. But in all these years that have gone by, you have been a functional human being, in some cases even above the norm, for all of 10, 20, 30, or 40, or 50 years. This is quite an interesting phenomenon. Because do you think that a baby can develop a personality the first day he's born? How does he develop it? How can this be? Yet you can talk to hospital nurses from coast to coast, and they will say, well, babies are very different. And baby doctors will often say, oh, they're products of their mother and father, and of course that's what makes them different. But do you really think that? How many children do not resemble their parents at all? In anything, in any phase of their life. How many children go contradictory to their parents? And how many of them even lead their parents, you see? So we have all types of children manifesting different personalities, and certainly they always manifest their own personality. They have to be themselves. I remember many years ago when I first told my mother about re-embodiment, she had brought me up in a religion that, of course, was strictly of the one life theory. You're born once, you die, and if you succeed or fail mightily, well, it's your problem, and on the basis of that, you spend either all of eternity or a part of eternity, as the case of the religion may be, as the case of the thought may be, and there are many different doctrines on this. Some saying that you go to purgatory and spend so many years there and then go on to heaven or to the hot place, and some saying that you go immediately to the hot place or to the holy place, according as the case may be. And we have often looked upon young babies, and we have said to ourselves, well, if only they had died as a baby, they would have gone to heaven from that standpoint. And so we find that salvation becomes a matter of man's either living or surviving long enough or not surviving long enough. If he dies early enough, he has a place assured for him in heaven. If he lingers on this earth a little longer, he may be denied a place in that heaven. I say he may be denied a place because that's the way the doctrine reads. And we recognize that this is not valid. And so when I came to my mother and I told her about re-embodiment, she had this, what I thought was a very crazy idea. But then this is very usual for young people. They sometimes think their parents have crazy ideas, whether they're right or wrong. And so, in this case, the mother thought that the son had a crazy idea. And she came out and she said to me, well, I don't want to be somebody else. She said, I want to be myself. And somehow or other, people develop a sensation that if they're reborn again, they're going to lose something. Their personality is going to cease to be. Well, where did it come from in the first place? I watched and helped deliver my own son. And as he came into the world and I beheld that little marble statue, pure white, suddenly I saw the red blood like the aurora of the morning sun springing from his heart. And then the fresh blood suffused his whole body, and the glow of pink life was everywhere. Well, where did it come from? That at the age of 1 year, he was able to read. At the age of 9 months, he was able to talk, and that he spoke at 2 months. And there are many in this room that know this to be true. And Dr. MacDonald knows it to be true because he spoke to her. Well, where does this power then come from that enables one child to develop faster than another? Some children speaking at 6 months, some at 9 months, some at a year, some at a year and a half, and some at the glorious age of 3 years and still turning out to be geniuses. So, how do we figure it all? Can you figure it out? Well, the answer is very sweet and very simple. It is, of course, the manifestation of the same soul, you see, but coming now into another body. I hope you understand me. And it doesn't make any difference. Shakespeare says, all the world's a stage, and each man in his time plays many parts. And in this play of many parts, we all have had the opportunity of being a man or a woman, and thus we do not find that the great burden of childbearing becomes entirely one of which the male sex is able to escape, in which the female is always charged with, because people do occasionally change sexes, this not being a part of the soul being androgynous and having the qualities of the man and the woman manifest in it. And therefore the ability to transfuse oneself into a physical body of either a man or a woman is quite easy. The sex being related entirely to the physical body and not to the soul. And so people have a chance this way to be kings and poets and peasants and live in many lands and climes, although karma may draw them as a magnet to one specific area of the world or to some soul. And so we often find that even marriages and friendships are, as someone once said, ordained in heaven. This means that the wheel of karma has developed those affinities which draw people together. Those who are alike are often found together, and those who are not alike often repel each other. Regardless of what people think, this is actually true. There are similarities in people that draw them together. They may have differences, but they have some similarities that are basic to their lives. And then again, of course, we find those who are completely opposite, and I do not find that this usually works. I remember one time, several years ago, when I was working for the Chamber of Commerce of the United States, At that time I walked into a tavern, which of course was necessary because it was considered legitimate business. And so we made contact with all people that were in business. And in coming in there, the bartender had such an antipathy for me that I never said a word. He did not like me on sight. There was such a terrible vibratory action set up in that man that nothing but a karmic responsibility of some kind, or the manifestation of a different quality in him that was accented so terrifically, sent him toward me in such a manner as to be almost offensive. Do you see what I mean? So people are that way. We sometimes meet them in the marketplaces, and we are immediately attracted to them, and we love them or we like them. Sometimes this attraction is motivated by something that people expect to get out of people. Then again, it is unmotivated. It is simple, sweet, pure, unabashed love at first sight. It doesn't have to be a man and a woman. It can be a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, who may love each other in a spiritual way. This has nothing to do with the physical body. They may think a lot of each other, admire each other, and be drawn to each other, magnetized. But it can be a man and a woman, and still the same process can occur. And I want to point out all these things because these are practical manifestations of karmic conditions. And we are on this planet for a reason. Make no mistake about that. We are here for a reason. And what we will do with this opportunity is entirely our own privilege. No cosmic being is going to force us to do anything against our will. In fact, we are going to have to take a crowbar, and we're going to have to pry the rocks loose from heaven before they'll fall on us. We're going to have to do something to evoke the appearance of the great Master. So all of us, every one of us, has had these experiences where we meet people and we realize that people are actually a part of our destiny. It's a jigsaw puzzle. We don't understand why we meet people. We don't understand why certain conditions come to us. But then, is it necessary? Do we have to always understand every facet of it in order to be tested by the law of life? Do you see what I mean? The law of life has its own tests for each of us. And these tests are valid and real. And they help us to understand the meaning of the divine. They help us to understand God. We're here for a reason. Not just for some vain idea or to enjoy ourselves. Well, the question arises, do we have a right to enjoy ourselves? Of course we do. It's recorded in the Scriptures that God has created all things richly to be enjoyed. And so we must learn to enjoy the world and not abuse the world. This is the problem right here. Too many people feel that they must protect their personality. And so they decide that it becomes some form of atom. They're going to build a wall around that personality, that permanent atom of themselves, and they're going to protect that permanent atom. They're going to protect themselves, the id or the identity, call it what you will. They're going to protect this against the whole world. Do you see what I mean? And this protection creates a barrier between relationships between people. You see this. And this is always a problem. But it has to be resolved eventually. We're here to learn. We're here to master our life, to achieve. And so I cannot tonight, even though I wish I could, bring forth all the great truths that are to be found in the teachings of the Great White Brotherhood. Tonight I will be satisfied to take a morsel of the crumbs that fall from the Lord's table, and I will give no more.